Shelley Cavanna here with Cora's Quilts, and today I wanted to take the time to chat about two topics that always come up at the beginning of every quilt along. And so, with our Sunkissed Mystery Quilt Along and our Spring Sampler Block of the Month project both starting in just a few short weeks, I wanted to make sure that we released this video before you started prepping and cutting your fabric. Mainly, we're going to chat about starches, the different kinds of starches, how they're used, and what they do to your fabric. But we can't talk about starching and fabric prep without talking a little bit about pre-washing too. So we're just going to kill two birds with one stone today and talk about them both. You'll also find on our blog a written article covering these same topics, and I'm going to go ahead and put them down in the video description notes below. So it's just a good way for you to easily find my notes and some of the links to the different products that we're talking about today. And the other thing that I need to mention is that this video is in no way sponsored by any of these products. I bought all of the products myself, and the opinions that I'm sharing today are completely my own. And also know that we are only chatting about 3 brands today, but there are many, many brands on the market. So it will take a little bit of experimenting on your own to find one that you are totally in love with or one that really works for you. Also, these are fairly hotly debated topics in our quilting world. And everyone has their own pros and cons. And we also have different quilting styles and different shapes that we're cutting and different sewing needs. So the most important thing I hope that you get out of today's session is information. And to know that the answers to these two questions vary widely, not only among quilters, but also among a single quilter's different projects. All right, so the first question is, should I pre-wash my fabric or should I not? And the answer may sound like a cop-out answer to you, but the answer is that it really is up to you and your personal preference and what your needs are as a quilter. So one of the main arguments for pre-washing your fabric is that it washes away the industrial sizing that the manufacturer applied to the fabric while it was still in the factory. And the purpose of this solution, that's a plastic-based solution, is that when it's applied to the fabric, it adds a little bit of body to the fabric, but it does not add any stiffness. And so what it does is it allows the manufacturers to roll the fabric nice and smoothly and evenly onto the bolts. And a lot of quilters do enjoy leaving the sizing on their fabric because they feel like it helps them cut right away. They have to do less ironing and squaring up. But for some people, especially people with really sensitive skin, they find that they're happiest when they take the time to kind of wash this sizing away. Another thing to think about is that by pre-washing your fabric, you are also pre-shrinking your fabric. Quilt shop quality fabric is made from 100% cotton, which, as you know, when you take it wet from the washer and you put it in a heated dryer, the cotton shrinks a little bit. And so by pre-washing your fabric, you are technically reducing the overall shrinkage of your quilt that will happen with the first time that you launder your quilt. And the purpose of this chat is not to instruct you how to pre-wash your fabric. So if it's something that you're interested in doing, it should be something that you research a little further on your own. But I do want to kind of remind you that if you are going to pre-shrink some of your fabric, you must also investigate shrinking your batting and make sure that you also pre-shrink your backing as well. Because if you don't do that, when you go to launder your quilt the first time, the fabrics that have not been washed will still shrink. And then finally, one of the last arguments for pre-washing your fabric would be to get rid of any lingering dye that might still be in the material. The colors red and indigo and kind of some real dark purples historically had a tendency of having some dye left in the material still. And when you would wash them, just like you would wash when you wash a brand new red shirt, you have some dye that kind of comes out in the wash water. If you are worried about lingering dye and you just want to make sure that you avoid this situation altogether, and you do choose to pre-wash your fabric, make sure that you sort them into different color groups, much like you do when you're doing your regular laundry. The purpose of washing dye out won't work if you take all your reds and wash them with your white fabrics, for example. So if you're pre-washing to get rid of lingering dye, make sure that you separate all of those prints into color groups and wash them separately. So the thing with pre-washing is just to remember it's either pre-wash everything or pre-wash nothing at all. And everything includes your batting and your backing. So something definitely to think about and investigate further if it's an area of concern for you. There are just as many arguments, however, for not pre-washing your fabric. Um, One of the most important things is that you should never ever be pre-washing your pre-cuts. So these are 2.5-inch strips, 5-inch squares, 10-inch squares, and often fat quarters. And that is because these pre-cuts will shrink in the washing machine and they will fray. Chances are, if you're using pre-cuts, you're using patterns that are specifically looking for these exact sizes. And if you send them through the washer and dryer, when they come out of the dryer, they will no longer be the exact size that you need them. So, in general, absolutely avoid pre-washing those pre-cuts. Another argument is that most manufacturers these days don't recommend pre-washing your fabric. Our modern dyes are quite a bit more stable than the fabrics of yore, and so it's usually just the darker red and indigo prints that we have to worry about these days. Another argument is that a lot of people really like that squishy feeling of a quilt that comes slightly shrunken out of the dryer after you wash it the first time. And it kind of eliminates, by not pre-washing any of your fabric, it kind of eliminates the worry of things kind of shrinking at different rates. One thing to mention here is that if you don't want to pre-wash, but you are worried about any kind of dye seepage, the best thing to do would be to get these little washing sheets. They're kind of like a dryer sheet, only you put them in the washing machine, and they're called color catchers. And you throw a couple in with the quilt the first time you watch them, and it absorbs any kind of rogue dye that's floating around without it getting absorbed into your quilt. So many people these days are preferring to wash their quilt the first time with a few color catchers rather than taking the time to kind of pre-wash all of their fabric. So, in essence, the question of pre washing or not really comes down to, like I said, a matter of personal preference and what aspects are most important to you in your quilting process. So, just know that your answer will be different from everybody else's, and your answer might even be different for different quilts that you're making. All right, now that we've kind of addressed the issue of whether or not to pre-wash, let's chat a little bit about starch. What is it? What does it do? And how do you work with it? All right, so starch is usually a grain-based product, so rice, wheat, or corn, and it's something that is sprayed onto the fabric by the consumer after purchase. So this is done by you in your sewing room and not by a quilt shop or a manufacturer. And the purpose of starch is to completely eradicate wrinkles, but also to add some stiffness to your fabric, which for us as quilters makes it easier to work with. So most starches are a spray that either comes in kind of a pump spray or an aerosol can, and you apply it to your fabric, and then you either leave it to dry and then iron it, or some people like to spray it on wet and then flip the cloth over and help the starch absorb through the cloth while ironing. And we'll talk about more on this in a minute. Um, Most of these starch products must be applied to the fabric before cutting. And this is because the moisture in the starch can shrink your fabric a little bit, just the same as putting your wet fabric in a hot clothes dryer. So the heat from the iron and the moisture from the spray starch can cause a little bit of shrinkage. Not a ton, but a little bit. And it would be so devastating to cut all of your fabric first and then for it to shrink, probably at different rates. Imagine trying to sew an accurate quilt block with various pieces that have shrunk slightly. So just play it safe and apply any starch-based products to your fabric while you're pressing it before you start cutting it. I think that the easiest way to kind of present this chat about starch to you is to kind of give you a sliding scale of products so that, again, like our chat on pre-washing, you can make decisions for what is best for you and more likely what is best and what you need for the project that you're currently working on. So, the first group of starches that I want to talk about are what I call the laundry heavy hitters. These are also kind of known as the heavy duty starch that was specifically made for laundering shirts. The most popular starches in this category are the Niagara and Faultless brands, but there are quite a few on the market. And before quilting, I would always associate the starch with kind of my childhood weekend chore of ironing my dad's dress shirts for the upcoming work week. And it was always really fascinating to kind of spray these wrinkly shirts right from the dryer with starch and then kind of watch them crisp up into smooth and perfect shirts. So, both the Faultless and Niagara sprays do come in aerosol cans. Um, I used to be able to find the Niagara in a spray bottle, a pump spray bottle, but I haven't seen it recently. So I'm not sure if it's just not available in my area any longer or if it's just not available any longer. Both of these brands are also widely commercially available. They're at Target, Walmart, most likely your local drugstore or grocery store, and I even found them at Home Depot that you could do curbside pickup at Home Depot. So I thought that was pretty amazing. Um, there are actually three different ways to use these. My research online has told me. The most common way will kind of achieve a medium sort of stiffness for your fabric, and that is achieved by lightly spraying the wrong side of the fabric and then flipping the fabric on your ironing board over and pressing the fabric from the right side to absorb all that starch up through the fabric. You can also achieve kind of a more heavier stiffness, almost like a cardstock stiffness, by like applying generously to both sides of the fabric, enough to completely saturate the fabric, almost to the point where it's dripping when you pick it up. At that point, then you would hang it up to completely dry by air, hopefully in a bathroom where you have a tile floor that's not going to be ruined by dripping starch. And then once it's completely air dry, you would iron it. I am seeing some bloggers that are saying that if you want an even more extreme rigidity, to apply your starch generously enough to completely saturate it. But instead of leaving it to dry by air, put that wet cloth into your clothes dryer, dry it until it's completely dry, and then iron. In a few minutes, we'll do a side by side comparison to kind of see how these methods work out. But there are three different ways that you could use them. Aside from having a lot of control over how stiff you can get your fabric by using these starches, one of the other biggest pros for these brands is that they are extremely affordable. Looking online this week, I was able to find the Faultless Luxe Finish Spray for about $2 per can, which is about 10 cents per ounce. And I was able to find the Niagara aerosols anywhere in the range of $1.35 to $3 for the same sized can. Now, this size can will last me about 1 to 2 medium size-ish quilts with a moderate saturation. So I do know that some quilters who prefer that heavier saturation will go through 1 to 2 bottles per quilt. But at just a couple of dollars per can, it's not going to break the bank to use this and use it as heavily as you want to kind of get that rigidity that you're looking for. Now, because these heavy duty starch sprays were made for laundry, not for quilting, there are some cons to kind of take into consideration. The biggest con for me is that both of these brands can really gunk up your iron and your pressing surface. In my home studio, I make sure that I have a pressing mat for my ironing board that is completely dedicated only to using starch and kind of ironing out my starched fabric. And this is because over time, with layers and layers and layers of starch buildup on your ironing board, um, with time and with pressing over these layers, that leftover starch on your board will kind of start to scorch and will not smell great and leaves a big brown ugly mess on your ironing board. And so it's kind of best if you're going to be using these to kind of have a dedicated ironing board cover that's only for starch. And I get a cheap one so that every few months, as the color starts to kind of build up, I can toss it in the trash and not feel really awful about it. One of the other things to be really careful about with using these laundry starches is that they do generate some overspray. If you have carpet at home in your sewing room, that means that you're going to be kind of gunking up your carpet. If you have hardwood floors like I have here in my own home sewing room, it makes for super, super slippery floors. There has been more than once where I have forgotten to mop up and have gone ice skating across my office floor, just from this puddle of starch. So, what I typically do when I am working on starching my fabric, I will put down an old sheet on the floor, which absorbs all of the starch as it sprays, and then everything can kind of go in the laundry at the end, and everybody stays safe. And finally, I do notice that if I have oversaturated my fabric and go to iron it right away without letting some of that saturation absorb, I am left with some little white flakes on my fabric. So generally this can be avoided by either using kind of a moderate hand with the spray or kind of letting things dry a bit before you attempt to iron it. And finally, one last thing to think about is that this starch can attract silverfish insects. So if silverfish insects are an issue in your region, you might want to think twice about spraying your fabric for your quilt with something that might be attracting bugs. All right, our second category is kind of our middle of the road category, as far as starches go. And these are products that are specifically made for quilters. And again, there are several brands on the market, but today we're just going to chat and focus on Mary Ellen's Best Press. And I think that's because this is the most widely known and most widely available. This product comes in a spray bottle, and it also comes with small and full gallon refills. So if it's something that you use a lot, you don't have to continually buy additional spray bottles. You can just kind of buy an individual bottle to refill the original. Another nice thing about this brand is that it is fairly widely commercially available. It's available in larger craft stores like Joann's or Michael's or Walmart. It is available online through Amazon at a slightly higher rate than you would probably pay in store. And it's also available at a lot of your favorite quilt retailers. What I noticed is that the pricing varies depending on where you buy it and kind of what scent you buy. Looking online, I was able to find the gallon refill for about $50, which works out to about 39 cents an ounce. A smaller refill bottle was $18, and that was 33.8 ounces or 53 cents an ounce. And my original 16.9-ounce spray bottle was somewhere in the range of $12 to $17, which is about 71 cents to a dollar per ounce. So this starch alternate, this starch made for quilters, is quite a bit pricier than our laundry starch. It's probably worth mentioning too, though, that you might not be able to make an ounce per ounce comparison between this best press spray and your laundry starch, because chances are you're probably using the laundry starch a lot more liberally than you would need to use this product. I bought it for the first time for this comparison, and so I don't use it regularly. But we are also going to experiment and see if there are three different ways to use this product, like the starch, either moderately with iron heat, liberally saturated, and then either air dried or thrown in the dryer. And we'll see if that makes any kind of difference in the rigidity that this product can achieve as well. Some of the other pros for this product is that it claims to not have flakes or any kind of a gunk buildup. I haven't used it long enough to to kind of evaluate that, but those are the claims from the manufacturer. And the other thing is that there are around 10 or 12 different scents that are available. And so it also comes in an unscented brand if you are like me and you have massive allergies to any kind of synthetic fragrance. So lots of choices plus an unscented choice to kind of try out. And funnily enough, our third category of starches is actually our non-starch pressing aids. So again, there are several on the market, but my favorite, and I feel like the most well known, is Flatter Spray. And Flatter Spray is from a Canadian-based company called Soak, which is most famously known for its laundry detergent that is meant for delicate or hand knit items. According to their website, you spray it on your fabric or your laundry to kind of leave things sleek and soft and static free. Some great selling points that they've advertised is that it's plant derived and it's really mildly formulated, so those of us with sensitive skin won't experience problems. And it claims to even be great to spray on while you're finger pressing in place of an iron. And so kind of spraying it on and smoothing things down when you're not using heat of any kind. Other great points from the manufacturer that they point out is that there are no flakes, no residue, no gunk on your iron, and no attraction to insects. And my personal favorite about this spray is that it smells absolutely fantastic. I really love the fig and the yuzu scents. They're my favorite, but their other scents are really great and subtle and not perfumey. So I think that's really exciting. But they also, if you are super sensitive, they also have an unscented brand as well. One of the downsides with this spray is ounce per ounce. It is the most expensive by far. So your 8.4 ounce bottle is $12, which is $1.43 per ounce. However, it is used differently than starch. It is not meant to saturate and stiffen your fabric, but it's kind of meant to smooth and flatten. So when you use this product, you're not going to be getting that cardstock stiffness, but if you have a stubborn block that just won't press flat or a crease that an iron alone won't get rid of, then this is the perfect choice. So as we were mentioning earlier with some of the laundry-based starches, I will typically, for a medium-sized quilt, go through 1 can almost of the laundry starch. My little 8 ounce bottle of Flatter, however, will last me a good 6 to 12 months or more just because you use it differently. So again, I don't feel like the ounce per ounce price comparison is really fair because this product is similar but kind of has some different uses. So. All right, that was a whole lot of information about the different products that are available on the market. But I think that the best way to kind of end this video and to kind of give you a side-by-side comparison of these products is to actually spray them on some fabric, kind of experiment with the ways that they can be applied, and show you side by side the effects that they actually have on the fabric. And so what I'm going to do is switch over to our Facebook Live video from a couple weeks ago so that I can kind of show you and you can kind of get that sliding scale of how rigid each of these products will make your fabric. Kind of as a control piece, here is a piece of fabric that was left over when I cut these strips. This is untreated. You can see it's got a little bit of some wrinkles there, but this is kind of our base for our experiment. That's kind of our base fabric. So here is the fabric that was applied with just the Flatter spray. You can see that it's super smooth. There are no wrinkles, and it gives no stiffness or rigidity to the fabric. It's just kind of nice and smooth and pleasing to work with. So generally, if I'm choosing to not use starch in my work, I will just mist a little bit of this Flatter spray over any problem parts of my yardage while I'm pressing it before I start cutting. So you can see it gives maybe just a little bit of smoothness, but there is not really any kind of stiffness or rigidity there. So that is the Flatter spray.
And then next came the Mary Ellen's Best Press. And so you can kind of see compared side by side that it has a little bit more body, a little bit more stiffness than the flatter spray. This was the one that I just misted on the wrong side and then flipped over to the right side and pressed. So it does give a little bit more of kind of a stiffness to this. So this is kind of, if we were kind of ranking these in order of least rigid to most rigid, flatter would be our least rigid alternative. And then kind of in that second step, this kind of mist that Mary Ellen just misted on gives a little bit of good rigidity. So we did apply saturating these two squares. I saturated them completely, and then this one I allowed to air dry, and this one I popped in the dryer, and they are just as rigid as the misted version, but they are no more rigid. So I don't know what the benefit of wasting all of the liquid to saturate these squares and let them air or clothes dry or dry would be over than just spritzing. So that answers the question about, you know, which method you would use for this, and maybe makes that big bottle last a little bit longer because there's no need to saturate, just misting is enough. So we'll toss these out of the conversation. And so if flatter is your least rigid, the Mary Ellen's mist would be step 2. And then here is the faultless mist. And I can't remember if I said this already in the recording or not, but I did these yesterday just because we don't always cut the same day that we do our ironing. And so I kind of wanted a 24-hour span. So the faultless, misted on the wrong side and absorbed up, is slightly more rigid than the Mary Ellen mist. And these spots that you're seeing on the fabric were there. That's not from the spray itself. It was just a damaged piece of fabric. So you can see that this is maybe kind of a level 3 as far as stiffness goes. And so in general, this is kind of these days where I like to land, because it's enough that I don't have a whole lot of fraying on the fabric, and it's enough stiffness to give me a little bit of extra support. And then finally, remember the faultless sprayed air dry, and then the faultless spray dryer. The dryer was supposed to come out the most stiff, but I don't notice a whole lot of difference between the air dry and the dryer. There is quite a bit of difference between the mist and the air dry. So on your sliding scale of 4 products rather, here is kind of the flatter. Here is kind of the Mary Ellen. Step 3 up the ladder would be the faultless misting, and then step 3 would be out of the dryer. So it gives you plenty of options to work with depending on what type of quilt you're making or what your needs are. Again, I probably would settle most on this misted level of faultless spray just because it gives me that extra little bit of stiffness. If, however, I was working on a project where I had to cut out triangles or with bias edges or curves or maybe applique shape, it probably would be worth it to me to do that extra little bit of soaking to kind of get through that and do kind of the dryer or the air dry method just to get the most rigid material I could to work with. However, in the Sunkissed Mystery Work Along, or Quilt Along rather, we are not doing anything with bias edges. We are only cutting squares and rectangles. And so I think that if you do like a starch-based product, that this misting would be the way to go. The one thing I also forgot to mention in the video is that the starch stays in the fabric. And so when you piece these together and you go to press, it will help you get a nice flat seam. And a lot of times if I have used the starch on my fabric, then I find that I don't really have to use the flatter spray to kind of tame my stuff into submission as much. So Plenty of food for thought. You are welcome to leave any comments or questions you might have here in the video description field, or head over to our blog at corasquilts.com, and we can chat kind of more about the options then. Thanks so much, guys, and take care.